Well, we're now down to our last test. We've got 2 chapters to go. Both of these chapters are going to involve using the time value of money. The good news is that we're only going to use 12% or 1%, and we're only going to be using present value or present value of annuity. So no more future values and no more percentages besides 12% or 1%, and actually 1% is 1/12 of 12%, and you'll see why in a second. Okay, we're looking at leasing. Well, there's 12 months in a year, so if we're using 12% and we're looking at it on a monthly basis, it's actually 1% a month. And I want you to think about the difference between buying a house or renting a house. And my first question would be, when you rent, when do you make your first payment? And of course, you have to pay before you actually move into an apartment. Whereas when you buy, you're going to go ahead and purchase a house and you're going to make your payments later. It's the same difference with a car. When you buy a car, you're paying later, and at the end of the month, if you will. And if you're leasing a car, you have to lease it as you rent, which is at the beginning of the month. And just a little bit of side information: if you purchase a car, you can purchase it with no money down and not actually make a payment for as long as 45 days. All right, so as I told you before, we're only going to be using the PV and PVA tables. We're only going to be using the case of Viva 12% annually and 1% a month. Generally speaking, we've got 3 options of leasing, and with today's economy, it is a leaser's market, which means that if you're thinking of leasing a real estate property or even a residential property, maybe not in Oxford, but in other markets, you have the ability to negotiate. There are 3 options that are very common in commercial leasing. The first one, of course, is monthly rent, and as we said, when you pay rent, it's at the beginning of the month. Then there's percentage of sales. We don't know our sales until the month's end, so we pay those at the end of the month. And we could even do a percentage of sales at the end of the year and just make a one-time payment, although this is not something that happens very often. And more often than not, you actually, in reality or in the real world, you'd actually do estimates at the end of every month. And then a combination of the 2 where you have a lower rent and a lower percentage of sales than the other 2 independent. And that way you get a little bit of each. You pay a little bit at the beginning of the month and you pay a little at the end. Okay, so let's take a look at the calculations for rent. Let's say that you have monthly rent of $3,500 for year 1, $4,000 for year 2, and $4,500 for year 3. As you can see, because you're paying rent at the beginning of the month, if you look at year 1, you have $3,500 plus $3,500 times PV for 11 months at 1%. And the reason why that is we still have 12 months, but we're paying at the beginning of the month, so the first one's in time period 0. Now, this will actually go ahead when we do the calculations for year 1. When we do that PV for 11 months of 1%, that brings everything back to time period 0. Okay, when we do that in year 2, if you look at the calculations for year 2, there's an additional calculation. We have the $4,000 a month plus, again, $4,000 times present value of 11 months at 1%. But that's multiplied by a PV for 1 year at 12%. What happens when we discount the monthly rent? It brings it to the beginning of that year. So in year 1, it brought it to time period 0. In year 2, it brings it to time period 1. And we have to bring it back to time period 0. And that's what that calculation of PV for 1 year at 12% is. What I usually tell people, if you don't understand this conceptually, just realize that in year 1, you have a 0 PV. In year 2, you've got a 1-year PV, and in year 3, you've got a 2-year PV. So every PV calculation with rent is for 1 year less than the year you're in. And we can go to year 3 and further clarify that. We've got the $4,500 of rent we pay today, and then we add that to the $4,500 times PV at 11 months at 1%, and then we have to discount that whole amount by PV for 2 years at 12%. So those are the conceptual calculations, and now let's look at the actual calculations. Above, I have the same writing that I had on the previous slide, and then we have the calculations below. So the first thing you need to do is do the 3,500 times 10.3676 and then add in the 3,500. And for year one, we get 39,786.6, I hope. If my calculations are in error, I apologize. I was doing this on PowerPoint with an iPhone as my calculator. In year two, we first go ahead and do the 4,000 times PV for, so we multiply 4,000 times 10.3676. Then we add 4,000 to that, and then we discount the entire amount by 0.8929. So you're going to take 4,000 times 10.3676 plus 4,000 times 0.8929, and you should get 40,652 cents. Then finally, year three, again, we're going to take the 4,500 and multiply it by the PV, which is 10.3676. And we're going to add 4,500 to that, and then we're going to discount that entire amount by 0.7929, which is PV for 2 years at 12%. And we should get 40,780.13. So the total present value of this lease option is 121,167.25, and we got that by adding up the present value of year one plus the present value of year two plus the present value of year three. Of course, because this is lease, which is an expense, you'd want to see this number lower. So the lower your present value of a lease option is, the better. So we want to choose the lowest option. All right, excuse me. Let's look at the percentage of sales option. Let's assume that you were offered the first lease option of 3,500, 4,000, 4,500 a year, or you were offered 5% of sales. Well, the first thing you need to do is, this slide looks bad, but let's go ahead and go with it. The first thing you need to do is assume what your sales are, estimate your sales, and what we projected is that year one we're going to have 900,000, year two we're going to have $1 million, and in year three we're going to have 1.1 million. So I know this slide is a little bit off, but I'm halfway through with the lecture, and I sure would hate to have to start over. So year one is 900,000, year two is $1 million, and year three is 1.1 million. Now, if we went ahead and calculated what our monthly lease would be, what we do is we take our sales, so our projected sales of year one, again 900,000, and we multiply that by 0.05% because that's our percentage of sales, and then we divide that by 12 because we're looking at our monthly rent. So we're projecting that we're going to have 3,750 the first year, 4,166.67 the second year, and again in the third year we're going to take 1.1 million, so multiply it by 0.05 and divide by 0.12, and we get $4,583.33 for our third year. Okay, so now we've taken our percentage, or our projected sales, and we multiplied it by the percentage of sales and divided it by 12 because those projected sales were on an annualized basis, and we have our forecasted monthly rent if we choose the percentage of sales. So we need to go ahead and do our calculations. And again, I wrote down the conceptual formulas up top. So, and then we just go ahead and plug in the multipliers. So I'm going to go ahead and skip down to the multipliers and go to the second year. And if you look, what we're actually doing is we're multiplying 3,750, our projected rent for year one, times the present value of an annuity for 12 months at 1%, which is 11.2551, and we get 42,206.25, or 63 actually. So again, because we don't know our sales until the end of the month, the first lease payment we make is at the end of the month. So we are still accounting for 12 months, but we're doing it all in the future, as opposed with rent where we were doing one today and the other 11 in the future. In year two, we're going to take our 4166 and again multiply it by that multiplier for 12 months at 1%, which is 11.2551. And as we did in the previous example, we need to discount that again by PV for 1 year at 12%, which is 0.8929, and we're going to get 41,866.96. The good news about these calculations here as opposed to the other ones is because it's all multiplication, you can do them in any order. The multiplicative law says that you can multiply and divide in any order and you'll still get the same answer. But whenever there's addition, you need to go ahead and do the addition in the right order. So these should be simpler to calculate than the previous ones. And then finally, when we do the math for year 3, we get 41,124.23. And when we add those up, the present value of our percentage of sales option is 125,197.81. So let's go back. If you look, we have 121,000 for monthly rent and change, and then for this we have 125. So we would choose the lower of these two options. We would choose the rent as opposed to percentage of sales. And then finally, our lease option could actually be a combination of both methods. So you may, for a problem, actually have to go ahead and do the rent for a smaller rent amount, and then the percentage of sales for a smaller percentage amount, and the percentage could actually be annually as opposed to monthly. So now I have homework for you to do, and I will go ahead and give you solutions to the homework. I would encourage you to look at the PowerPoints for the formulas when you're doing the homework, and it should start to make sense. Thank you.